Well, good morning.
Good morning, yeah.
Thank you for spending the time with us. We're with Louis Moreau. We're going to talk about Domaine Louis Moreau and the wines that we have such great privilege to sell here for WineGo nationally. Will you please share with our team sort of the core history of the domain and the general philosophy that you have created over the last 25 years?
Sure, yeah, no problem. It's always difficult, I would say, to put sixth generation in a few minutes. But yeah, the estate has been in Chablis. It's always been present, I would say, in Chablis since 1814, with basically, I would say, my great grandfather, who started, I would say, the estate. He wasn't, I would say, a wine grower back in those days. He was more a barrel maker, actually. Okay. And he married, I would say, into basically what we said, he married into the vineyard. That started, I would say, the Moreau, I would say, long-lasting, I would say, generation of wine, I would say, growers and vinificateurs and winemakers also. Today, what is Domaine Louis Moreau? Domaine Louis Moreau basically is 50 hectares of, I would say, many different parcels. It's a large estate for Chablis overall, which is good in a way, because if you look on a map, it is over different villages all the way through the appellation, basically what we call left bank, and then right bank. So it's definitely a strength for us, because we are able to blend, for example, different parcels for the Chablis village only, the youth on the left bank. And then on the right bank, we have, I would say, the depth with all the vineyards in Chablis village, for example. So it's always, I would say, a challenge for us, I would say, to pick individual plots, individual vineyards, and then bring them back, I would say, to the winery, vinify them individually into different tanks, and then I would say go through a blending and assemblage in probably February, March, and start to look, I would say, our final cuvée. So it's a strength, and also the Premier Cru and Grand Cru, obviously Grand Cru right bank, 100%. The Premier Cru, the one that I would say we have probably the most volume into it because of the size of the vineyard, is on the left bank. Premier Cru Voligno, not probably as well known compared to the other Premier Crus. The 10, 12 other Premier Crus that are, I would say, what we call the Climat, the top ones, which we'll talk afterwards. But Voligno was upgraded in 1976 from Chablis village to Premier Cru. And it's always quite, I would say, interesting. We've been working it to make it, I would say, to kind of fall back more, I would say, in line. Before, we had a lot of difficulties with the Premier Cru. It was either very mature, or it was a little bit, I would say, on the underripe size, or it was very fruity. Today, we want to showcase the Voligno more into a nice, I would say, mineral, and with a lot of fruit, a lot of depth, very aromatic at first. And again, this is a combination. Voligno, if you come to Chablis, left bank, it's a long valley. The vineyards are going to be planted northeast, so a little bit cooler. You don't get sun, morning and afternoon. So you get the richness from the soil, which is a combination of clay and calcareous. The clay will give it what I call the shoulder, and the calcareous will give it that nice, I would say, chalky and tension that we bring, I would say, into it. One of the parcels, as I said, long valley. We have one parcel that is at the entrance of the valley, where it's going to be always a little bit more riper. And this is where we bring, I would say, a percentage into the blend to make it what I call a Premier Cru, that if you get the name, forget the name. It's a very good example of what I would say, a Chablis Premier Cru should taste like. You have, I would say, the minerality, you have, I would say, the roundness, and you have a fruit, I would say, fruit aspect. Then we go, I would say, more towards Chablis Village, still on the left bank with Vaillon, very emblematic. Premier Cru Vaillon is, again, very interesting because it's a 3-layer bottom part, much cooler, draftier into the valley. Then you move up to the second strata where you have the vineyard really sitting on a hard base chalk, and then you go to the top where it's a mix again between chalk and then where you have a little bit of clay also. So depending on where your vineyard is, you have different expression. But for me, it's really a multi-layered, much more discreet on the nose at first, but very interesting, multi-layered, where you have the soil really speaking through in terms of chalk, in terms of tension, very delicate, and that you get that nicer, more pit fruit, peach, pear, yellow fruit on top of it, just rolling nicely. 58 years old vineyard, much, I would say, older compared to Premier Cru Voligno. That is more of a 45-year-old vineyard. And Vaillon, because of the age, you get less bunches, and you get much more, I would say, ripeness. So we have to be very careful again into the vineyard management, into early harvest, to keep a good level of acidity, natural acidity, and again to really work on that acidity level as what I call just balance, and to give it that nice, I would say, leanness into the wine. And then we travel to Premier Cru Les Fourneaux. We go all the way, I would say, to the right bank. So we go 5 kilometers, a few miles. And Les Fourneaux is, for me, in between. It's really in between a Vaillon and a Voligno, really south-facing, very warm climate, sun morning and afternoon. Here, if you're not, I would say, careful, you can really go into, I would say, over-ripening, which could be interesting in certain style, but for Chablis style, where you want, and our style for Domaine Louis Moreau, where we're looking more for purity, for leanness, for terroir expression, we tend to, again, vinify it, we tend to harvest it, I would say, early for, I would say, the purpose of, I would say, very clean, I would say, vinification.
So if we were on the right bank and we're standing in the Grand Cru section, are we heading towards Fauchon to get to Les Fourneaux a bit further?
No, we're
going the other way.
The other way. Yeah. Exactly. If you look,
right.
Exactly.
Looking at the hill, turning right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at the Grand Cru, you're in Chablis. You look at the Grand Cru, right? You're on the bottom part of Les Clos. You go right.
Okay.
You go 3 kilometers. Montée de Tonnerre, Mont-Milieu, and Les Fourneaux.
Okay.
Right afterwards, yeah. So it's quite, I would say, interesting hill, and very, I would say, a lot of changes, I would say, between the Montée de Tonnerre, Mont-Milieu, and Les Fourneaux. But Les Fourneaux, yeah, we've been very careful, I would say, into the style of it. Again, and not to let it go towards, as I said earlier, towards too much, I would say, ripeness. Okay. So very, very important. Now a lot of, I would say, a lot of changes into the estate since I came back, I would say, from the US, where I spent 10 years, different places, and learned a lot. Probably learned, I would say, more towards vineyard and towards the US, and especially California back in those days, were more, I would say, very, I would say, forward in terms of environmental practices. We were very, I would say, back, I would say, in Burgundy and in France as general. So I probably took a lot of those practices, I would say, back in Chablis. A lot of vineyard management, I would say, to come to the style of wine that we have today. Probably 15 years, I would say, a lot of work, I would say, into the vineyard, even though we were making wines. But what I wanted, I would say, a vineyard to be in probably good to very good condition, knowing that I would say the team will be also behind it in terms, I would say, all the way to the first, I would say, pruning that we do in December, all the way, I would say, to what I call canopy or vineyard management, to be as astute as possible. Again, to have everybody, I would say, understanding that we want to go towards less, but less and better. Not necessarily, I would say, to really stress too much the vineyard. But the idea is to produce, I would say, better bunches, knowing that for me, 60% of the work, if you have, I would say, good quality grapes, if you can bring, I would say, good quality grapes to the basically to the winery, you have almost, I'm not saying your work is done, but you have so many more chances of bringing a top wine.
And so this work in the vineyards is sort of resultant of the idea that your father had a very successful négociant business, that these vineyards were supplying part of the fruit.
Yeah.
And then he sold his négociant business and said to you, Louis, what do you want to do?
Yeah,
are you coming back? The US is lovely. Are you coming back?
Are you coming back one day or not? Knowing that I was supposed to be going there for an internship for 6 months, and as I said, 10 years later. But you learn a lot. You get a degree from Fresno State, probably a degree. More, I would say, again, vineyard management. I have a double degree in enology because I did the equivalent back in France. But yeah, you can't, I would say, forget, I would say, the history. You can't forget, I would say, the family history. You can't just say, no, I'm going to do something else, even though it's tempting, I would say. But you want to come back to your roots. And I've always been, I would say, very comfortable. I've always been, I would say, this is where I'm happy. Yeah. I would say walking the vineyard, being in the vineyard, being with the guys, and also in a winery. But no, you can't just, I would say, take the page and just, rip it off saying, nah, I'm not going to come back and this is going to be for investors. No. There were so many things to be done. There were so many things to change again. I told my dad, yeah, I'll come back, definitely. But it's not going to be négociant. It's not going to be for volume. Trust me, it's going to be more for estate. It's going to be more for quality. I'm going to bring in probably new itinerary into, I would say, into the vineyard, into vinification. But it's got to be done, I would say, for a purpose. You can look at me with big eyes going, are you crazy? And I said, no. But after 20 years now, he's, and even before that, I would say, he's very comfortable. He understands better, and he sees, I would say, the result. And especially for his generation, I mean, you're talking about environment, talking about less volume, you're talking about canopy management. It was just like, what are you talking about? So it was, but it's a different world. It's a different world, and today we have to challenge ourselves. We are a good bunch, I would say, of wine growers in Chablis today, where we can, I would say, challenge each other, also exchange idea, and we see that we do have problems, but everybody has pretty much the same problem. So if we can get, I would say, all of us together, we can make, I would say, the appellation, I would say, grow better. And it's good times, definitely good times in Chablis right now.
I think that just hearing that Chablis growers and producers are now back into maybe for the first time ever, fully collaborative mindset, it can only be a good result for Chablis, because you are competing against the rest of the world, not against each other.
No.
The rising tide will float all of you. And Chablis has a wonderful opportunity right now because of the price to quality ratio that Chablis offers, as opposed to the greater idea of Burgundy. So you should explore it. Let's jump back and talk about your Grand Cru properties, which ones you have, and how they fit into the winery as a whole.
We have obviously different vineyards. As we say, the Chablis appellation is 1 Grand Cru and 7 Climat. Out of the 7, we're fortunate to have, I would say, the larger parcels that we have. The vineyards that we own is Grand Cru L'Éclos, which is probably the better known, I would say, all the Grand Cru in Chablis. And then we have a good size, nice parcel of Valmure, Grand Cru Valmure, and then on the bottom, just behind it, Vaudésir also. and we have a tiny bit of Blanchot that is on the top side, I would say, of the Blanchot, I would say Blanchot Hill. And not to forget also, we have a family monopole, which is Clos des Hospices. It's kind of a different parcel. It's not an 8, I would say, climat. It's never been, I would say, qualified as a, or never been registered, I would say, as an 8th climat. It's simply a parcel that was, I would say, farmed before the 1900s by the monks of Pontigny. It's always been, I would say, well identified. We have the original maps and everything, and our what we call our governing body, ENAO, which is the Minister of Agriculture, said, okay, because of the history, you can continue, I would say, to use, and we are proprietor of that, I would say, land, which is on the bottom part of Les Clos. You can continue to farm it the way it is, and then you can label it, not necessarily Grand Cru Les Clos, but Clos des Hospices. So it is, I would say, our monopole. There's only 2, basically, in Chablis, official, what called monopole. There's one with Long de Paquis, Bichot, with La Moutonne, and then the second one is Clos des Hospices.
Okay. So it'll show up on the bottle, but it'll say Clos des Hospices and Les Clos.
And Les Clos, yeah, okay. Within Les Clos, yeah.
So what's the core difference between Les Clos, Blanchot, Valmieux, Vaudésir? Because the wines taste different.
Yeah.
Les Clos is like the largest parcel, yes? In center of the hill, yes?
Yeah, center part, yeah.
Is it the warmest? Is it soil? What makes Les Clos and Blanchot and Valmieux and Vaudésir different?
For me, Blanchot, because the hillside where it's, I would say, located, if you're on the bottom part of the Grand Cru, if you want to see Blanchot, you look at it, it's going to be on the side, towards the right, but it kind of, I would say, turns into the small valley looking, I would say, of the Montet-Tonnerre to the village of Fier, cooler and much more chalky, harder soil compared to the, I would say, to the rest of all of the Grand Cru. When you jump from Blanchot onto Les Clos, and Les Clos, nice, I would say, sunny, calcareous, chalky. You get a little bit of clay, but I would say tiny bit, probably on the bottom part, more compared to the top part. But you get the exposition, which makes a different personality for Les Clos. And then you drift slowly into deeper soil, Valmure, even some of the Grand Cru that we don't own, but if you look at Preuze and Bougros, it's, I would say, much more, I would say, deeper, thicker soil. The wines are going to be, even though they are delicate, if I can say, they are very generous in terms of, I would say, depth, and you can find that in the Valmure that we have, even though there's no oak at all in the Grand Cru Valmure. The personality of a wine can really expresses itself into that nice, I would say, depth, but not overpowering. It's not kind of falling. It's very well balanced, and it's long lasting on a palate.
Okay. And so Vaudésir and Valmure have deeper soils. Is it more marl and just less stony?
Less stony, more marl, what we call the marne. And probably less for the Vaudésir. Vaudésir is always, for me, more aromatic, very floral. When I say delicate, it's always kind of, it's lingering up in, I would say, in terms of aromatic, very nice, but I would say good depth also.
Okay, great. So obviously you've already told us that vineyard management, bringing in clean, beautiful, healthy fruit is job number 1. Job number 2 is to then let that fruit speak. And you have some norms that you use in the winery, fermentation styles. The lack of oak use is a big point for you. Talk us through a little bit of, all right, this is kind of my philosophy of and normal process for making wine once it gets to the cellar.
It's the idea again, you make a lot of effort into the vineyard. We do stress, I would say, to a certain level, the vineyard, again, the vineyard, done on purpose. But with all of that work, it's normal that you're going to look at your itinerary into the winery to make sure that the quality that you have, I would say, built over years and every year in terms of vintage, we're going to bring it to the winery. So we do, I would say, everything is handpicked. I would say for Premier Cru and Grand Cru, brought into small bins, so you avoid any, I would say, crushing, any juice. Bladder pressing, I would say delicate, and then you get the juice. You let it settle for 24 hours, cool temperature, 15 degrees, and then you let, I would say, the fermentation, because we don't use any cultured yeast or selected yeast. For Grand Cru and Premier Cru is sold what I call indigenous yeast that we have. We've been doing it now for six years, been successful. What we find is the juice being at cooler temperature, it takes about 5 days, 6 days to, I would say, go slowly into fermentation. Important time, because for me, this is one of the key factor where we are able, I would say, to lock in a lot of the aromatics for the future wine. And then the alcoholic fermentation is going to be longer, and it's going to be not as, I would say, even though it's temperature control, but it's much more smoother in time. It can take 3 weeks, it can take a month, compared to before, where I would say in 10 days it was over with. So much more longer process, but much more delicate, again, for the aromatic purposes. Then after that, we take time. We tend to be, I would say, as low intervention as possible onto the wine, but time is definitely key with new tanks that are, I would say, of smaller volumes, where we can, I would say, do individual vinification, and the purpose behind it I would say, to keep the wine into the tanks with a good amount of, I would say, lees, not, I would say, gross lees, but very fine lees, and that with time will, I would say, settle gently into, I would say, the bottom part of the tank and get that nice, I would say, autolysis that you get into the process. And then you end, when you look at Grand Cru, for example, 18 months, the Premier Cru, 14, 15 months, you get, I would say, the lees are almost, I would say, naturally digested by the wines. Then we do a final racking, and then 3 months, and then we do the bottling. So time is definitely key. Management of the lees also, size of a tank, and low intervention. Trying to reduce as much as possible, I would say, any overpumping and the lees also. It's a very delicate management. You have to be very, again, precise, astute, again, with the lees management. So we don't, I would say, pump over. We just, I would say, we're not looking, I would say, for extra autolysis, or I would say, as soon as you start to do, I would say, too much, I would say, pump over, the wine, it's going to open up much more, but you have to be very careful, again, with the amount of oxygen that you bring into it. So it's...
And one of the things I love the most about your wines is the purity of expression of your lees management. It's not lactic. It's not overly bready. No. It's just really textural and a whole nother layer in your wines that other people don't get out of that same effort. So whatever you're doing specifically that makes it work that way is amazing. So thank you.
No.
And that idea that you're getting those lees to stay suspended longer in the tank is magic. It's just beautiful. So, this last parting shot for our team, right, is, the one thing that you feel is absolutely critical for us to understand about your wines, that thing that we can say, this is why you buy Louis Moreau.
Why would you want to buy Domaine Louis Moreau wines? For purity, for identity, for history, for family, for estate. There's a lot, I would say, a lot of words that I could put. I would say one next to each other. But probably for start, yeah, purity. I like that purity, équilibre, balance into the wines. It's easy to make wine. Basically, when you look at it, it's easy to make, I would say, everyday wine. But to make good wines, it takes time. Mm-hmm. And once you get to that level of research into the wine, of understanding your vineyard, understanding what you do in terms of itinerary into the winery, and see how far you can push it. Mm-hmm. To get, I would say, yeah, you have Premier Cru Voligno, and you have the grapes, you know where they come from, and you're trying to bring it and to really bring that identity and what Voligno stands for, and not just Evaillon and not for Les Fourneaux, but really for Voligno, and trying to bring and do that, I would say, vintage after vintage. Is difficult, but it's a challenge. Mm-hmm. And once you are able, I would say, to reach to that, yeah, it's a pleasure in a way to be able to open a bottle going, yeah, this is where I want to go. But it's never, I would say, and it's always, you never stop. It's always, I would say, a new process. There's always, I would say, new things you can bring, I would say, to be better. Because today, basically, it's where you are successful is into details, no matter what. Details into the vineyard, again, details into the pressing, all that, I would say, important 2 weeks of harvest. This is really key into a first choice that you're going to make for the vintage. And then the follow-up you do in vinification. So yeah, it's just a lot of small details that are going to bring the wines, I would say, just to, I would say, a better level. And for you, I would say to say, yeah, Domaine Louis Moreau has its unique style. It's going to be no oak at all, whether it's going to be a Petit Chablis, all the way to Grand Cru. It's a style that I do assume, and I like, I would say, for, again, complexity for the Grand Cru, for diversity for the Premier Cru, and even for the Chablis and the Petit Chablis, which is really almost the entry level. You have fun with it. Yeah, it's fresh and it's crispy, and yeah, you just want a glass and with friends and just enjoy it. Grand Cru and Premier Cru, yeah, you want to sit down, have, I would say, dinner, have a nice conversation around those wines. It's very different. But yeah, Domaine Louis Moreau, we are part of, I would say, the appellation, but I think that we bring something that is, again, even though it is difficult today with climate change, it's difficult with environmental pressure. We have a lot of challenges, but yeah, we're trying to bring, again, Chablis wines, no matter what.
Yeah, I definitely think we can latch on to purity, precision, crystalline nature of your wines are things that I would encourage our team to talk about.
Oh, definitely.
And they are very, very pleasure-giving because of it. And I really appreciate your time this morning. I love the fact that we get to tell your story through your eyes to our team. So thank you very much.
Thank you.